David is also just an excellent fellow. Can't say enough good things about you, David, and I'll let you try and say some nice things about yourself when you're up here. What's interesting, I think, in David's life is that another apple's fallen from the tree. His daughter, Cass, is now working in Toronto with an architectural firm there. She'll get it right and come to London and work here and know that this is a much better place to work. But somewhat selfishly, David and I probably live similar lives, having fathers as architects and people that we look up to. And I know that David really does appreciate the work that his dad has done, and he's learned tremendous things from him that I think we're fortunate enough to hear about tonight. A lot of the material that you see that's been displayed here comes from David's hand, but some of it comes from the office, and it's all for sale. We encourage you to bid high. But with all due respect, I'm looking forward to this talk, and I hope you enjoy what David has to tell us. It will be interesting. It's a local story for the most part, and an interesting one.
Thanks, Tom. So we'll cut this one out and engage this earpiece of mine. Thank you for your comments there, Tom. Unfortunately, mine's a little longer than 60 seconds here. I appreciate all of you coming today. It's maybe a talk long overdue, perhaps. All architects, I think, in London should perhaps have their moment to stand up here and talk about what they have some passion in. Architecture related too, so you can see I've brought kind of an array of things around here, from the old Middlesex College renderings from 1960 to some handmade furniture items. You'll see more of that in the slide presentation, just artifacts so you can have a look at them, touch, feel. And then some pencil drawings, watercolor, acrylics, and pen and ink drawings. And then finally what you first saw when you came in, they were, as Tom said, images from our past. So these are, believe it or not, ink on linen drawings back from 1860, 70, 80, 90. And that's how they did things. It was kind of a rough rendering of what people wanted to see, and then that was passed around a committee, and then off they went. They'd build based on usually 10 to 12 drawings. Nowadays, sometimes those packages are 120 drawings, so you kind of wonder why we need so much information, but it's a legal world these days. So I've titled our talk today, I guess, on snapshot of an architect's life, which is, it's true, I think, when my father and my family are mentioned in the storyline. I put up Bill Murray, I think, just because he's sort of a champion in my mind, and when I was tasked to try and come up with a portraiture drawing with acrylics, so I thought, what better guy than Bill, you know? He seems to forge his way and not give a rat's about what anybody thinks, and in a way, I think that's not a bad way to approach architecture. Like, you might as well be a trailblazer. You can see that there's lots of different ways you can pursue ideas. But the right thing to do is, you know, build your own dream and be passionate about it. I'm tied to this thing, so I'm getting worried now. There we go. The building that I resided in for 30 years, and my father 30 before myself, and we overlapped for about 4 years. I had the pleasure of working with him. My dad unfortunately passed with a heart attack in '91, and then I was bound to take over the firm from that timeline to today. Dad designed the building, so it's always been kind of a neat 1960s building, half stone, half glass. And the idea of the building really was the glass part was to let the public see in, and there was a wall inside there where the work, as it changed, the work changed, so you'd always kind of have an eyeball of what the architect was doing. And in behind the stone wall was the meeting room where all the firm decisions were made, and a really beautiful studio space in behind that. I'd been known for doing some larger murals. You'll see a couple of them here just on the side of the wall. This doesn't come out so well, but bottom line, there's a rectangle and a design drawing of a fire truck and number 12, which then turned into, so from sketch idea to the reality of what I was thinking of doing. And this was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, in fact, because I'd been happily working on the weekend on a project, and it happened to be fire station. I came out and somebody had spray painted the building, and also got a couple of cars in behind my building. So it was like, well, what's up with that? I was so angry. The next day I came in and drew this up. So it's basically, if you look close, you can see the two windows in the fire truck. Those are the two windows for offices. And then the idea was that you were looking in your rear view mirror, seeing the sound or the siren from the fire truck and the lights and sort of the noise of the truck coming your way in winter or summer. You can just see Byron up there. That then led to mural number 2 once the fire truck kind of faded away. And I written sustainable architecture. In the end, I left my father's building, so sort of a sensitive topic. It took about 6 years finally to leave, but the Shell people next door unfortunately let 2 of their tanks go underground, so the result of that was it polluted my building and fumed it. So I'm the frog looking at Shell, saying, what's up, what did you do to me? And my 2 girls are the 2 little frogs roughly in the middle and at the end here. And then the 3 red ants who are supposed to be working on our behalf, meaning government. There's provincial, federal, and municipal. They're fighting. So as you know, ants aren't supposed to fight, but that's what they're doing. And the object of all of this is just to say, hey, aren't you guys supposed to be looking after our planet a little bit better? So putting it on the side of the architect's building was kind of a bit of an up yours, I suppose. But the idea was to pay attention. We only have one planet. So where do things start? My grandma actually my roots are Mexican and Irish. It sounds a little messed up, but and that's where they are. So this is from 1891. My grandma liked to oil paint, so I've got a whole slew of these. And followed by my father, so they moved from Mexico up to Toronto, and then my father went to Dalhousie for a period, and then eventually the University of Toronto. And at U of T, they had a very good program at the beginning of the architecture school. They actually had the students go up to Muskoka area, and they were obliged then to come up with 15 pencil drawings. So you see nature, you see natural studies, and in this case, some building studies, and then ultimately some pretty complex drawings with 2D vanishing points. And these today, I think even on a computer would be tough to replicate. And I find them perplexing drawings because I just can't imagine somebody putting a pin in one end and in the other, and then there's a ruler that goes by, and it's a bit of madness. But nonetheless, I think it was a great program for the University of Toronto as it got people drawing. And ultimately, the tool that we have first is our mind, but if we can't get the message of what it is we're trying to communicate out verbally or in some sort of fashion that's drawn, it's hard to communicate anything, really. The last bit of the University of Toronto experience at Dorset, that was the name of the place, was they had to do 10 watercolors. So these are distributed among my family, but there are drawings today I still love, and I think it probably was one of the things I kept on seeing these sketches and drawings in my childhood. So it was part of why I am the way that I am. My father he left Toronto in about 1949 from Mathers and Hollandby, an architectural firm, and inherited the Moore family's architectural practice. It was called O'Roy Moore, and then his father, John M. Moore, early 1900s. The drawings actually date back, some of the ones that you see in behind you here, if you have an eyeball at the end, they date back to 1850 or so. So they've been put together now in 3 different volumes or phases. And they're encoded up at the University of Western Ontario, so you could go and study and research by the date, by the architect's name, by the city, really just trying to understand who did what. And you've got a pretty good chance, if it's old London, whether they're churches or manor homes, there's a pretty good chance you have a 50 or 60, 70% chance of finding your building there. The last of the collection ends in 2009, so ends up being, I think there's a total of about 14 architects that are represented there. I'm referencing this book actually because many of the drawings that you've seen at the back here are actually published now in this book, and I'm not sure if it's for sale, but it's actually a very good book for documenting how, when, and why development took place at the Fork of the Thames, where we are now. It's a good read, actually. You get to see how markets started and, really the development of London as we know it now. So pity when you see old buildings coming down. Just as a quick sample of what's in that book, here's the London Club, for example. My father, so it would be 1949, came to London and joined O'Roymore, quick drink. And yes, it's just water. At the time, Mr. Moore was having some failing health, and my father and several other, it was Murphy, Schiller, Green, and Martin after a time, started to put together some of the buildings up at the University of Western Ontario. Some of the ones that are my favorite, I've just highlighted a few because of their differences. Alumni Hall still being a multi-purpose facility for sports events, convocation, and I think some pretty decent concert hall moments have happened there as well. Weldon Park is the other one, represented by a kind of a brutalist concrete hull. But I think in London today, it still represents some of the finest finished concrete that you'll see out there. It's all ribbed if you get up close to it, these stair towers that you see on each end. And actually a pretty fine building, in my opinion. He did that project with John Andrews, who's an architect from Australia. Just a couple of others. Recently renovated Talbot College, which Mr. Nicholson Sheffield have put a fine addition onto. And then Middlesex College, just to highlight some of the fun that they had. Maybe a bit tough to see, but if you happen to be around there, you'll see gargoyled in the arches are all the draftsman's initials, which I thought was kind of a fun touch. All of these drawings take a vast amount of teamwork. So it's not just the architect. There's typically a team of 5 or 6 that are putting one building together, and then under that tutelage, I guess you could say there's a sub-consultant team of structural engineer, mechanical, electrical, site service, and finally landscape architect. I'm going to shift gears here from architecture and just kind of go into talk about a way of seeing. And I've taken pictures of different dimensions of the backdrop images that you can use, in this case watercolor paper, and then a simple watercolor set, and what I have kind of around me all the time. So there's always a pencil set, there's always paintbrushes. So wherever I go, I always date and number what I'm thinking about, and that's come from my father's always keep a good record, and the way of doing that is just, even if you've got a bucket, you draw, put it together, and put it face down, and just whatever you do is always face down. So when you do look at it, it's all in the order that you did it. So that's what I've been doing for a long time now. Probably too long in some ways, but I enjoy doing it, so it's kind of a nice way to look back and remember what you've experienced in your life. Along the lines of Bill Murray, so it's just trying to draw onto a different medium. So you can get these 12 by 12s at, what's it called, White Row? What's the name of the? Michael's, that's the name of it. And they're kind of cheap. This is canvas, the one on the left, and an idea about perspectives and buildings, but abstract. This is me trying to figure out how to draw with acrylic, and it's a bit like drawing with lipstick. I still don't know what I'm doing, frankly, but that's okay. I'm learning. And I have to say, I think that really has mystified me here. You can, in the next room, if you pay attention to some of the acrylic and oil drawings out there, knowing that there's people over the generations that have done these 10-foot by 8-foot high oil drawings, and there's the whiskers on the guy's nose at 50 feet that you can see. I've never been able to figure out how people have done that, but the only thing I can imagine is they must have had a tremendous amount of time and patience, to have been able to have gone to such a large task at those drawings. I think I'm lazy, which is why I draw in small images, but it does force me to draw in different sizes, and that's why I try to choose different paper sizes, because you then end up, how you draw the image changes based on the envelope and size that you're drawing within. Running Man here is, this was an idea about stamping furniture because I was selling quite a bit of it at university. When I came back from university, I then joined my father's firm, and the first thing we were trying to figure out was, well, how would we brand the youngsters' arrival? So we came up with the green and red Irish-Mexican colors, circle, triangle, square, so it was about geometry and negative space, and some of the things I'm talking about I believe you can see in the image in front of you. And then at the bottom with Middlesex College, that's just the chronology of the former firms. Back to the pen and paper stuff. Message being, the more that you draw, I think, your hand-to-mind connection, I think the better it gets. So to either remember a moment so it's referenced for later, so you can create something that's come from you. So the guy on the left, I guess, or I'm going to get this right here, the guy on your right, just an idea about the pencil and combustion, and hopefully out of the end of the pencil there's a good idea coming. Drawings to my right, just, again, simple pen sketch line drawings versus analytical, but in this case, a melting vase into an apple and a bit of more drawing. This is me trying to understand how to use watercolor paintbrushes. So it was like 3 or 4 different sizes, and in this case, the one is thumb going into the water. The other is about Fiesta ceramic ware and liquids passing from one vessel to the other. I'm going to move quickly through sketchbook stuff here, but as I said earlier, the different sizes of paper force you into a different compositional idea. So when you see all these other pictures in any museum you go to, it's always kind of an interesting question. How did they start with that proportion? Why did they start vertical or horizontal? In most cases here, they're backgrounds of pencil and then imaged with watercolor. So the one on the, that's not going to be too clear for you to see, so I'm just going to motor ahead here. Some of them are drawn not just with paintbrushes, but they're done with potatoes, cutting shapes, rubber, and oftentimes the idea is to start out with a small image to then turn into a larger image. So some of the ones that you'll see small up here will turn into larger images that are up already posted. YouTube, so learned a little bit there. You add salt to things and it messes up how it chemically reacts to the paper. The image on the left was about vertical and horizontal studies, and then trying to figure out what happens as you put curvilinear images against that design. The image on the top right actually turns into the image, ultimately that's a large image to the middle. I guess one of the lessons I took also was to try and figure out, well, what can you actually do with a paintbrush? So painting, I guess it's a really good way in my mind to clear my mind. So after you've designed something, I guess it's then how would you express it? So as an architect, you're used to expressing everything in black and white. And it stays sort of that way on trace paper, and I think sometimes the best ideas usually come from the smallest of sketches, where the concept is clear at a beginning point, and then it's developed. I'll also draw things that I like, I guess, in terms of other architects' designs and or places from my travels. There are a couple here from the Bahamas, and there's a Picasso head somewhere over there on the left-hand side. Michael Graves' work, architect, in the middle there, and Corbusier's in there as well. Pen and ink drawings have been something that I've always enjoyed doing, so you'll see the lilies here are also expanded into larger version, and my daughter loves it when I draw cartoons, so I've given those to her since she was a little person. I'll plow ahead here. 2 dogs, not sure why I drew those. I'm still sort of, I'm always interested, I think, in the Art Deco period, so whether maybe some of these drawings look a little deco-ish to you, but it's the one time in history when it's like there was too much money and a lot of design time invested into the most inane objects that you can think of. But that's the very thing that makes it so exciting. So whether you're looking at a ship, a truck, a boat, a car, the paintings of the time, the sculpture of the time, like they did it and then they really did it, you know. So my eye was always attracted to that, and I just really love I love that time period, and in some ways I wish we could get back to it. It's almost like speed is the thing that we're after today, and the cost is always bearing, but speed is everything. These are just some paintings about trying to draw sky and landscaping in a different vocabulary, and exploring color. Some black and white drawings. I'm going to keep moving here. The drawing on the left with the hands, it's a one-line drawing, so it's kind of an interesting exercise where if you just have your 2 hands and it's your mind memory of how you're going to be drawing something, but conceptually it's about not lifting that pencil off the paper, so you're trying to craft the concept in your mind, and what comes out on the paper is what comes out. On the left, it's fooling around with, this was some iPod at the time cases for my kids. Some travel images, again, when I'm there. This is getting excited about Ray-Ban when they had foldable glasses. I thought that was pretty neat. On the right, it's a linear study of, I guess you could call it a rainbow of colors, but you know, that could really be hung anyway. It could be representing clouds, or it could be viewports through trees. It could be a lot of different things. So abstract drawings, for me, are impressionistic drawings. I think, for me anyway, they have more weight than the technical drawing. For some reason, I think I'm more attracted to it because I think it's taken less energy to get the idea out and on to the next thing. And then the realistic drawings of the 2 cups and the pears are just about catching something at a moment by shade and light and picking the 3 colors or 5 colors that would describe it. More travel shots. Looks like I've been on a beach too much. This is when I come home from the beach. The guys on the top left have had a bad day, I guess. And it's just crunched up wet paper to create the shapes of the faces. Let's see, keep going. Naturalist drawings. The top of the page, just images of floral and vegetation arrangements. And then morphed cartoons standing at a bus stop, or perhaps morphed boats on the other side. So I think we're almost to the end of this. Then one of the explorations, I thought, I haven't done a lot of it, but if you study, if you study etchings on either copper or stainless steel or aluminum, in this case on plastic, kind of a neat idea to be drawing. I'm sure I've got this thing right. Neat idea to be drawing the negative of what you'll ultimately have appear in front of you. So negative images, locomotion, and then at the end, this is probably, I think, about 5 years ago, I did the Corbusier drawing. But it was an idea about a drawing to celebrate the kind of the grand designs that he had come up with and given us them. So the idea was the hand was the gesture of giving. These are now larger drawings. So the one on the left about the tree or a root, it's taking a paintbrush flat that's about that big and then trying to create the image in a negative way. The bird is just an idea of coming out of the wind. This is me getting excited by an idea of some Art Deco drawings that I'd seen, again about negative space. There's actually a T service on the one on the left, a bit tough to see. I'm not sure how well it comes out better in person. This is about bending over backwards, I suppose. Pencil drawings still, I think, fascinate me probably more than any painting will do. Mostly because they're gestural. I think if you can get an idea of something down, a human figure is very hard to draw, I think. It can be boiled down into a series of geometries. So that's quite a three-dimensional drawing on the one hand. And then the hand drawing has a bit of an extended third finger, kind of on purpose, but it's drawing on the premise of something very small can be made with your hand, and it's as much of a wave as it is another gesture. The trees, I guess, is an image about, again, a big brush and how you can create a palette of depth with that one brush, just by the treatment you give it. And the roses are something, I've drawn a lot of roses in my life, I think, as soon as I saw Macintosh, the architect from Scotland. But I was trying to draw them in a way where the rose looked like it was floating on water, so, and overlapping, so that's what that idea was about. Another potato stamp drawing, but with some motion for the birds. So some of what I've spoken about, we're all equipped with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a mouth. And I've always thought that to use them in that proportion is a good idea. Listening to what others have to say, I think, and specifically, I think in terms of building committee, if you're trying to build a project, the hope is that what you've listened to from your client turns into a great design that would have impact on their lives from the moment the building's up. So it's not an ego thing. It's more what can you do for them as a designer to make their lives better, and any of the public that would use that building make their lives better. So I've sort of described the process, sketch paper, trace paper. You'll see in the images to come that we're a firm that believe in a lot of model making, elevational studies, and in other words, doing the small thing carefully before you build a massive mistake. Like, you want to try and make sure you've got the proportions of something correct. Switching gears to just another medium, but at the University of Toronto, I was very fortunate to get on well with the shopkeeper there. We had a wonderful, fully equipped workshop with all woodworking tools and a bit of metalworking tools as well. So the image on the right was a talk that I gave in my final year. It was just on the things that I'd built while I was at university. So the top is about cutting boards, and then it goes into some larger cabinets, which I'll show you, working with some more complex things which have to do with multiple materials coming together, meaning joinery. And then the last is actually a sprinkler pipe table that I designed and put together. The image on the left is just a block. I keep thinking I'm tagged to this thing, but so it's heavier than it looks. So laminated pieces of maple, and ultimately it carries. And make sure that you've kept all of your stencils in the same place. My first year at architecture school was one where, at the University of Toronto, things in the studio sometimes disappeared. So it was a good idea to think about how to secure your stuff, both in terms of your drawings and the stuff that you needed to do your drawings. We were all kids that wanted the Walkman device, by our desks, and you'd plug in and just draw till you couldn't see anymore. But this is a little thing I made for my Walkman. It works really well, actually, for the iPod or Apple iPhone. I made also a couple of cases for my mom and dad at the time, a metal one and a wood one. Second year, then I made some cases for my brothers. It's how to put plywood together and join it in a way where all the details present themselves visually on the outside. Cutting boards I made for a lot of the people. I sold quite a few of these actually, but they overlap. So if you have a long piece of wood, you get two, but without wasting the wood in between. A sprinkler pipe table I alluded to before, so just common kit of parts, and then by getting the measurements right and threading them right, you can make yourself a nice little drafting table. So on the right, I'm going to reverse everything here. This was an idea of my father's, actually, because he knew that I was going to be building a larger project, but to design a dolly, it sounds like a simple thing, but the rope winds around the middle, and then there's carrying handles, so as you carry it, it's easy on you. And this is a copy of a shaker mirror. I just wanted to see if I could build it. So all of these images that I'm showing you, they always start off with a sketch. So, and usually it's a plan, section, elevation, and an axo to see whether I like it. And sometimes I'd mock up a little model. The cabinet on the right it's about 4 feet high, so it's made out of one piece of plywood. And if you cut plywood in a particular way, you get all the shelves, all the component parts out of the one piece. In a similar way on the left, the first one was a cabinet for myself at architecture school, so I didn't get everything ripped off. And then the one on the bigger one is a stereo cabinet for my father, and that's 4 pieces of plywood. Same deal though. So the challenge was to figure out how to cut it, create the component parts so you didn't waste anything. University project, I put it in just because I think it's kind of fun to see it evolve. So we had to design a 50-unit hotel in the woods. So you could interpret that whatever way you wanted. My interpretation was to develop a kit of parts, which consisted of telephone poles and wooden beams and stone taken from the site, and to transport people into the tree. So it was like designing a treehouse cabin for them. Then to design an insulated modular wall assembly that could move from side to side, and the panels could be changed out. And then finally a roof over that structure, and then this thing could ramble down the hill. So you'd park your car underneath, come up the stairs, and then have the panoramic view in front of you. So I mentioned earlier that there was a shop wizard, I'll call him, an old German master craftsman at the University of Toronto. So in the summer of my 4th year, I took to the task of designing and drawing, working drawings there on the left, and I apologize for the image quality. But the premise of the thing was to design a captain's chest. So when I refer to that, what it means is captains traveling the seas, they'd make their carry-ons with handles that could come and go from vessel to vessel, and could take, if you picked the right woods, like mahogany and maple, you could take the cabinet with you. So all your stuff, if you were captain, would end up going in one of these things. So this is me 1,000 years ago. Those are kind of frightening. The game, I guess, was to try and figure out how to panel the wood, so that you've got grains matching. And when you put wood together, you have to design it in a fashion when they're assembled so that you have cupping and opposing concave cuts of wood. You can appreciate that if you put 4 slabs of wood together and you had them all concave, in about 2 years' time, that whole board would start to warp on you. So the forces of nature do matter, and if you don't pay attention to them, it messes the product up pretty seriously. So this was designed for a 7-foot person, because I've got some Danish cousins that are like 7 feet tall, so they visit me from time to time. The premise of the design object, though, is that it's a take-apart assembly, so you could take, there's 4 parts in the case of the bed. It's still kind of out of focus here. The middle part could be removed, so the bed would lower down as my children grew up, and the children needed the stool, otherwise they wouldn't get into the bed. it's too far to fall. Just as an example of how it's aged now, so you can see the handles and the flat finishing, so you wouldn't catch yourself on any of the handle or hardware. Just the details of how motion is achieved in the sides of the drawers. If you make them out of maple, then you have a hardwood finish that over time doesn't wear out, like it's a hard wood. And final result, in and out. Leftover wood. Another, I guess, interesting thing in the path of my design life, I've been lucky enough to do a couple of art glass windows. One for the Salvation Army, so there's that rose motif coming back. And in this case, I guess it's, I was trying to explain by color the different seasons, so you take the different panel and then end up morphing it, so you're only seeing one example, but and then the one on the left is a stained glass unit that I designed and built for my two daughters. Record keeping, so I guess what I've been doing, which I believe is handy, I've got my 11 by 14 hard-covered book, which goes with me to work sites and things, but the idea is anything that interests me, or that it could be anything from a postcard to something that you've cut out of a newspaper, whatever it is that interested you gets in the book, and then it's kind of a choreographed version of business cards, people, or ideas. It's also where I'll draw. So these images, again, a little grayed out for you to see, but I'll keep going because it's tough for you to see them. This is change of chapter. So now, first couple of years out of university, working for NORR Partnership Architects, I was very fortunate to work on a project for the Toronto Dominion Computing Centre. So if you write a TD Visa or check or credit card, this is where it'll go through. A massive structure, so it's like 290,000 square feet. The program requirements, architecturally speaking, were that we had to have natural light to all of the employees, so it necessitated having the central atrium. And from there, they wanted we wanted to describe, I guess, by way of geometry, the various departments. So you can see circle, half circle, square for the various pieces of that puzzle. And the drawings in this case were just pencil crayon rendering on Mylar. No complicated computers, because this is now like 1987 or so. Bainbridge models, Bainbridge board models to show materials and lots of glue. But again, it conveyed what we were trying to explain to the client, and these models all you can take apart, so you can look inside them and question, you know, what you like, what you don't like. These are the pen and ink drawings that we did to try and explain a building. So as you explode it from roof down, you can see the atrium, the circulatory pathway through the building, anchoring stair towers for exiting on the end of the building, and then the component parts of program, and then landing onto the site plan. The visuals of the interior, again, pen and ink. And I'll just point out the stair in the middle of this building, because I've designed several of these open stairs to atrium spaces. You'll note that as you get on the stair, 15-foot floor to floor, as you get on the stair and traverse up, you end up getting on the stair in the same direction you go off the stair. So your experience of it is linear. So this was the design drawing to craft the relationship of how you build it, the screen that slides between the two stair stringers, and the end result. One of the first jobs that my father and I worked on was for the Children's Aid Society, so you can see some of the language of the previous NORR partnership experience come into play, I think, on this building. And I included some of the quick sketch drawings that I've done to, they're literally like this big, but they're quickly getting at the idea of why you would place the building in a particular way to set it up so that as the building grows in the future, the building can extrude as the parking can extrude. Those elevation drawings are the ones that are on the ground over there if you're taking a walk around afterwards. And part of the challenge of drawing white, there's a lot of architects that love white and black, but white's very tough to draw. So how do you draw white in the old days? Maybe it's easier now with computers, but what we did anyway was we used blueprint paper, which is sort of a purple blue, and you put mylar over top of that. And that's a plastic with a semi-transparent sort of feel to it. But you can pencil crayon draw on top of that white on both sides if you want it to really punch, but it actually allows you to draw white. Just to speak, so now into some of the later projects, and all of these moments, I guess, that I'm showing you here, they're sort of snapshots of moments in my career. I was a firm believer of, again, always trying to make a model of what it was that we were trying to communicate. In this fire station project, the siting here, immediately up to the right here is the Byron Library, which is a project my father had designed. So first thing I was going to do was not put it in front of that. So the siting of the building, I guess, was a problem with many of the neighbors. They didn't want to hear the sirens roaring. And I can remember we had to go to a public meeting in the Byron Library building. And I was walking into a room just like this, I'd say, but a lot of kind of pretty angry faces that the fire station was showing up. And then we came in with the model, and I mean, that room just flipped. And it was a beautiful thing to see, actually, because what had been, and it had been in the newspapers as well, that it was going to be a real problem and they needed an alternate site. But it was, to me, a good tool to let people's eyes do the talking for you. And in the end, it was a very smooth project, and I think the model certainly helped. Nowadays, we see computer renderings being used, and I have to say there's a place for them. I kind of consider them a glorified pencil, because really that's what they are. They're still a communicating device, so it's really how you use it and the finished result in this case. So we had some fun with the trinkets here. There's a little fireman, north, south, east, west guy, weather vane at the top, and I also believe we had fun in a lot of the details of that building, from canopies to brickwork. This building is also elevated and on the ground over there if you want to sort of see some of the drawings we had presented. Some clients are, they're great clients because they, intrinsic in their makeup, I think firemen are team players by their very nature. So when you're working with a fire crew, they understand what it is to come up with the best result for all. And I certainly appreciated them. Of all the clients I've had, I think they've been a really great client in that regard. I put bulletproof here because it's a 24/7, 365 crew that's using these buildings. So you see the concrete block, stainless steel finishes, and so on. I just put this in as a donation thing that we did, but this is just a little miniature fire station for the children's village that we donated if you happen to be out at Fanshawe College, or Fanshawe Village, Pioneer Village. Some buildings are renovations as well by nature. So the Kinsman Rec Center is one that we did, where we designed a concrete block module, 8 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches, put it onto a defined grid three-dimensionally, and then played within the grid. So the model comes apart. There's an upper viewing gallery in behind the green curved area you see, which looks out onto the rink. We tried to celebrate the entrance into the building, a waiting area, and then the cubes that you see popping in and out of the form of the building are sort of a play on that concrete block, glass block, initial building module. So work with a concrete block, try not to cut it, is the sort of message there. Right in front of that canopy, as you walk into the building, then there's a grand stair that takes you up to that public viewing arena, and there's a skylight that brings light down into that public space. A lot of the design work that we try and do once we get over the model part, but programming-wise, this is a health center in West Elgin where program of the building, there was a large doctor suite, in this case identified by the red brick, and then a large public rentable space, so identified by the white stone and brick. Trying to make both parts cohabitate and be secure, in this case, from one another, because there was teaching kitchens, that kind of thing. Again, a community meeting was required, and by pulling the roof off, it was an instant way to show everybody how their part of the puzzle could fit. And this is sort of mid-90s. Late 90s, we were tasked with having a multi-purpose user, City of London. So when many of us have seen these white rose buildings around Ontario, either blown away as a result of receivership, or in this case, saved. So a sustainable green idea, I think. A pretty nasty building to start with, frankly, but anyway, remember that image. Not for long, though. We built then a model of it, so parking lot to the top, facing the street, and a cemetery green space, followed by a recreation basketball area, and then the layout of 3 individual client groups. There was a library, a YMCA, and a daycare center that all had to kind of come under that roof with a small addition. So we elevated, and I think we ended up, and this is where I'm talking about team versus not a team. This was a great struggle of program functions where everybody wants the front window, you know, so not everybody can have the front window, so there's going to be a wrestling match to see who gets it and why. So part of the idea of making the model and ultimately elevating it was to try and have them be satisfied with their position within the building. So final result there. A similar renovation project in early 2000 in Stratford, another children's aid facility. This was a case of a Cadbury chocolate bar factory, which is defined really by the square of the building. And our intervention was to recloak the building on its corners and reinforce those corners, and then take the facades that we could fool around with and punch out bays in each case, north, south, east, west. So a curved facade and a sloped tipped wall facade is what we came up with. And I've been messing around with this detail of tipping faces in and out, and it's pretty boring to make every face vertical, and I guess a lot of buildings do that. But I think we can have some fun with that if you give it a chance. Another premise and a lead principle, as many designers have to follow these, is what I call it WYSIWYG. I think it's a computer terminology, but what it means is what you see is what you get. So the idea there is that if you could expose the concrete block or glass block or the structure and the mechanical systems and hang the lights, you do actually have some advantage of it. We can all appreciate the wonderful feeling of spaciousness that if we just leave it exposed, you have that advantage. Many buildings, sadly, I think, end up covering everything up, you know, and it's expensive to do. And ultimately, I'm not sure you're really winning, I think, in that equation. In fact, I'm certain you're losing. Fire station project we did, I think, in 2003 or 4, I think it is. So this was part fire station and part apparatus maintenance division. So there had previously been an existing facility there that was falling apart to fix their fire engines. So the idea was to jam them together. So we tried to come up with a facade that was that spoke to both pieces of that puzzle. It had to be fire station and it had to be a place where they could fix things. And that white three-dimensional object is the thing that divided and was also the entry port into the apparatus division. Each part of the building had its own public entrance. This is another one of those projects, too, where there's a fair bit of convincing, I think, on our part to try and relate back to some Art Deco principles. So we ended up, I believe, talking the City of London into allowing us to design these bas-relief panels. So there's 6 of them. 3 in front of each of the windows for the garage doors that were there. So on the apparatus side, although again tough to see, they represent locomotion time and it's tough for me to see the other one here. Oh, and a smelting process representing the industrial things that have to happen as you're fixing something. And then on the other side of the apparatus, I think I've got a picture of it here, is just water, wind, and fire. So those were carved actually by Puglia. I don't know if any of you have heard of Puglia, but he's a plaster worker in town. Marvelous craftsman. But the reverse molds are made of plaster, and then you cast a lightweight concrete and reinforce it with fiberglass, and you end up getting something that's still pretty heavy, the 5 feet by 5 feet that are craned and put into place. Not unlike the limestone ones that you see on several banks from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This is a project we did in joint venture with MMMC Architects in Brantford. This is a model that, concept-wise, we'd come up with a very compressed site, but they wanted to put a 50,000 square foot building on a site that was really very, very tight, to the point where I was trying to encourage them to get another site, just because it would have been easier later to have added onto, and their history had certainly been an example of starting off at 10,000 square feet. In 10 years, they're 22,000 square feet. In another 10 years, they're 35,000 square feet, and so on. So we can pretty well predict that it's going to get bigger. So the best we could do is design something that could get taller, and that's exactly, they could put another story on this building. The design premise of the building was to try and come up with sort of two hands that are embracing. So the two curved facades are that idea. And what are they embracing? Well, they're embracing the living room of the building, which is a green atrium, skylit filled, and a green wall. And there's public play spaces internal to that. And in the back of the building, there's a small court as well. Playing around with the contrast of materials here, there's everything from red brick to match some of the red church buildings that are immediate neighbors and smaller residential buildings that are near them. And contrasting that with a stone module, and then how you play and identify circulation vertical towers and light the stair, together with creating a central space opposite the atrium on the left, but on the back. So you can actually, there's see-through views from that atrium right through the back window, which is the image on the right that's tipping out. A little while ago, we finished a project for D. Grant and Sons. They're a local general contractor in town. So I was approached by Dave Grant and Mike to see whether we could come up with a building for their existing site. So sadly, I don't have one of those old shots of it would have been a 1970s old building that they had been in, like a 1.5 story bi-split, and somehow or other they ran their whole business out of that building. So we ended up going to Committee of Adjustment and literally built them tandem, so they continued their operation here while we got committee variance to get closer to the street and plunk the building 3 feet away from their building. So once this was built, we tore down the old building, and it's now future potential addition space to this this concept. As of why it is the way that it is, I guess a typical kind of low slope roof. Frank Lloyd Wright thinking, some of the details in terms of creating stone block corners and then recessing facades against that stone. And the recess does give you some things, like it gives you very good shade and internal to the building. There's no glare at all, actually. It seems like, other than maybe on snowy days, but certainly in the summer, that overhang is a benefit for all. I've stayed away generally from any kind of political stuff, but I'm going to throw a little bit out here just so there's some numbers. It's kind of a surprising thing to think that contractors, general contractors, and I'm not even talking about design-build contractors in our community and across Ontario, about 15,000 owners of those kinds of operations versus stamped architects running either sole proprietorships or in a partnership. So it's a vastly outnumbered math. So when it comes to advertising, as you can appreciate, we're steamrolled as architects. Prior to 1960, all buildings that went up had to have an architect's stamp. Our own OAA passed legislation then to allow buildings that were over 6,000 square feet to be by architects and/or engineers, and anything under that could be by anybody. So I believe some of the quality of what we see now being built is a direct result of that moment, and we can say what we want about it, but that's how it is. So second item here, I put a lot of advertising that goes on. It's like the architect isn't even considered in the equation. And I'd point out that a general contractor does a wonderful job building it, but I don't think they can take credit for the concept of designing it. So it's basically a blank piece of paper until a design team is thinking about what the project concept should be and why after having talked to an owner group. It is a growing trend today, I think, to hire design build contractors or construction management firms to procure a project, and even to the extent that provincial governments are now hiring teams, P3 I think we'll call them. There are other designate terms for it, but I kind of wonder about it, so I'll just put it out there. I think that I believe success comes out of recognizing that if you competitively tender a package of drawings that have been carefully prepared in concert with the owner's wishes, you're for sure going to have a competitive result, because you're going to have 8 or 10 bidders on the project, and the result of that is you know for sure that they have been tendering amongst the various subtrades to give the low ball bid. And it's not low ball, it's a competitive process, and you've got if it's a formal bid and everything's value assessed as being formal, then that's the guy that should win the project. There are a lot of projects that seem to now go this design build route and end up either in court, or there's a fight ultimately where nobody gets along with anybody by the time the project's done, and that's like about 180 degrees from anything that I've experienced in my life. I just think there's a simple way to do this, which is our predecessors have told us how to do this because it's worked. You know, if you hire the architectural team, they will administer the entire process from design, work with the owner's needs, and then tender it, and then administer the construction. Everybody wins in that circle. Typically, if you're going to hire as a person for your own benefit and welfare, if you're going to hire a dentist, a lawyer, or accountant, or anybody that's going to be working directly for you, I don't think your first words would be, well, let's see if we can find the cheapest guy to do that surgery on me. It's probably the opposite. You want to find the guy who's most experienced, that you can put some trust in. So I'm a firm believer of you pay for what you get on this planet, and it is worth getting an experienced architectural design team to procure your work. And ultimately, I think a lot of the stuff that's built, and we kind of look at it and wonder why you don't feel that it has any presence architecturally. And the answer is because there is no there. Like there's no architecture there because it's been slapped up without much thought given to it. So how to proceed? This isn't really a lecture about this. This is my opinion, so take it as that. But I believe the conventional road of hiring an architect to administer the design and construction of the project is an excellent delivery system. I believe a lot of owners today are being duped by the advertisement that this construction management or design build will promise them the moon, and that it'll save the money, and that it'll be ahead of schedule. But like ultimately, for you to procure a building permit and a site plan approval process and get it approved to build it, you have to prepare all these drawings anyway. So really it's a snake oil promise, in my opinion. And I've never heard snake oil that works that well. Ultimately, you have no one representing in that scenario. No one really represents the interest of the client or the owner. So it feels to me like it's a blank check just made out to the contractor by the owner, and good luck. And my guess is there's there's a lot of addendums and a lot of change orders being issued throughout the process because no one is coordinated amongst the subconsultants. The last statement I've put here is just that city building departments, this goes across Ontario, I think must recognize that a set of drawings submitted for permit, if it's being put forward by someone who isn't an architect or is pretending to be an architect, they have to stop that kind of stuff, because if it happens, then if they get away with it once, there's a belief they'll continue to get away with it. So that's why the building code enacts the power of the law behind the building divisions to support the process of, I guess it's indemnifying, and it's the insurance to the public that the right people are operating on your buildings, much the way a doctor would operate on a person. So thoughts on tomorrow. I believe we can start today, and I think there are things that could be changed in the way owner groups, decision makers thinking about building anything, including city officials, I believe. I believe it's a sustainable, a green, and a sensible choice to hire the local architects in our community. And that's a trickle-down process that ends up benefiting all. That in turn then means that sub-consultants from the London community would be hired, and you then have a viable and healthy architectural community in the city of London or wherever it would be, Brantford, Kitchener. There's a lot of cross-contamination now that's happening. I think it started sort of the early 80s. Some of our institutions thought it was a good idea to bring in Toronto power, we'll call it, or expertise, but I'm here to tell you that since 1851, local architects have got along just fine without anybody and any expert, quote unquote, helping. If there's an idea that there's some magic talent that's elsewhere, I guess I don't believe that to be the case. I think there's a lot of excellent design talent in the City of London. And I'd also, I think, put a slap on the back of Fanshawe and Western and Waterloo students within our region to say they're the guys we should be hiring as students. So in other words, support our local educational platform and system. And those are the people that right now, as they come out of their schools, some of them aren't even looking in London. They're now looking to Toronto to get hired. And it just seems like the circle of the way this is supposed to work isn't working when Toronto architects or Kitchener architects are hired. So if it sounds like I have a bone to pick, I do, because I think it's not the right way to proceed. Personal opinion, of course. But City of London, just as an observation to seeing what other successful cities, not just in Canada, are doing, but United States and Europe, they actually budget 2% of their capital project budget cost for a building, new construction for public art. So that means on the exterior of the site and on the interior. I think that would be a good thing to do. From architectural firms, those of you that are present, I think mentoring the younger students in your firm, as well as participating in RAIC Syllabus program, I believe is a great thing to do, because it keeps keeps the interest in the program going, which is basically how to become an architect by correspondence course. It takes a long time, but I believe it's a viable and valuable thing to be helping younger kids get through the program in their way, which isn't conventional university way, but it's a way. In the case of the London Society of Architects, I'm hopeful that all architects that are here and maybe do hear about this in their communities could give a talk about the work that they've done and the things that they're interested in, and give a little bit of a window as to why their buildings are the way they are. I've been kind of talking in many cases about the visuals of the outsides of the buildings. Believe me, I'm equally passionate about the functional programming inside the building, but I think the more you participate in these sort of things, I think the more the community as a whole learns, and the more the firm that you're in would develop. including participating in open doors tours. I've done that a couple of times at my office, and I know some other firms in the room here have as well. Follows as well the end of the City of London Urban Design Awards. I wrote in there Rotten Tomatoes Award with a happy face, because I'm not, it's no good to go around saying how bad things are. I think we should be trying to celebrate the things that are good. But ultimately, as you're building a project, logically there's, like, I think a project can go two ways. You can decide that you want to work together as a team, meaning owner, consultant team, City of London officials that have to review all of this stuff, and the general contractor and all of his subtrades. You are a team, and if you embrace that idea from the beginning, the moment you put pencil to paper to the moment you're giving the key over to the building or the contractor is, it can be a great and fun experience, as opposed to one where everyone's duking it out all the way through about price tag. I've put up a couple of images here from another architect I'm a fan of, just as sort of there is, I think, light at the end of the tunnel when I see some of these things being designed and constructed on pretty minimal budgets as well. A lot of our buildings in town in particular, we have a couple of, I'm careful of my words here, concrete towers, we'll call them. Tombstones, like that's... There really should be something in there. But there are other ways of doing things from a design perspective. Copenhagen, for me, is kind of a mecca of, like, it's Pancakeville there. There's a nice river, and it's good access to the sea and so on, but most of their topography is just pancake, flat as you can get. But here, this firm in particular, I'm highlighting one, and there are many in Europe and likewise the United States, but they're exploring the idea of using architectural form and creating a language and a kit of parts that, when coming together, it's giving each person within, in this case, a residential dwelling, and on the left, an office structure. There's views and light and views and green space and accessibility to all. So it's like everybody benefits by the way the layout has been put forward for all. So another couple of examples, you've got another ground plane. There's a very inviting ground plane to bring people in, and then a ramp to bring people up to that plateau up in the sky, another green space, and still another one on the higher roof. And then on the image on the right, a residential complex, which, it's almost mind-boggling, but there's daycare, there's commercial spaces within this building. They're all residential suites, and each one of them can be accessed by bicycle. You can drive up this building, including on the roof, and you have an address for your bike. There's a garden for each suite as well. So another way of doing things, Copenhagen it's a great biking city, as is Amsterdam. But again, a new way of doing things. So rather than taking this building and thinking, well, the best way we can, put 400 units in here is to just go straight up with the exact same floor plan, 40 stories, and think that you've done a good job. Well, the reality is, like, you haven't done a good job. It's kind of sad more than anything. I'm not sure if many of you have heard of the serpentine designs that happen in England, but it's an award where, the Richard Rogers and Fosters of the world, famous architects, have been designing things. And I just highlight this one as I think just a good example of thinking in another way. So this Bjarke Ingels fellow entered and was awarded this competition entry. It's just like it's an ice cube tray made out of fiberglass, and it's a hollow rectilinear tube. And then the idea of the form is it's a wall that's then exploded. And inside, there's enough space there you could have a little musical concert hall or a meeting gathering. And it lights up at night, and it can be, it's acoustically marvelous, I guess. And they're tipped just enough so as rain hits it, because of that tube, no one gets wet. So it's an exploration of a line that just gets exploded, and all hell happens, including making a space in the middle and a pathway through it. I'll close, and I have been trying to keep to time here, just by acknowledging the great work of my firm and staff, without whom all of the buildings I've been a part of would never happen. In a similar way to the consultant team, a couple of the members are here, which I'm appreciative of. Their hard work. Thank you to Museum London. Some of the people are still here for the setup of the chairs and so on. And for Tom, the introduction, appreciate that. And I've just closed, I think, with a thought that there are some wonderful things to see that are pretty close to us here. By way of example, Buffalo's not too far away. There's some great Frank Lloyd Wright tours and buildings. There's 5 or 6 right there, if you're interested, any of you seeing that. Also, Arrow and Eli Saarinen work is just at over the border at Port Huron near a place called Troy. His whole campus that he designed for a boys and girls school is there, and it's mind-blowing. If any of you haven't been there, it's certainly worth the trip. And on, I guess on the side of talks that are, and perhaps we'll come to this arena for the London Society, there's a great film called My Architect about Louis Kahn that I'd recommend. So with that, I will close with, I guess, the knowledge that Junior is coming up. Cassandra's, she's just finishing off her experience record book, so I've been telling her she's got the lucky job of looking forward to, I think it's 13 exams now, I'm told, before she can put her shingle out as an architect, so not so fun. Anyway, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and I would encourage you to, if you have any questions, by all means, I'm here for a little while, or if you have some now, I'd be happy to entertain any of them. Thank you. Always gets quiet at this part. Miss? Fire truck? Thank you. Yeah, I kind of miss it too. It was hard to paint over that, I have to admit. It was a nice celebration, actually, of some fire station work that we'd been doing over time. And you don't see many murals, but there are some specialists that actually. I think the Beal Art program actually has been promoting some, I think on their track, if I'm not mistaken, each class is given, I think, a window, and panel. They're a nice idea for beautifying the city. And the funny thing is, I think when those murals went up, I'd been tagged probably, I don't know, in the first 15 years of me being in the building, I'd say 10 times, maybe. That mural went up and I wasn't touched. Like after that, it was free and clear. And same thing for the frog mural. It's been an anti-graffiti device, actually. So can't beat them, join them, I guess. Someone's got to have a question. I would encourage you to look at the older drawings too, because keep in mind, this is like some poor guy sticking a quill into an ink blotter and then going to it on linen paper. So if you blow it, you got to start all over again. So it seems like madness to me, but maybe no more different than what we're doing on the computers these days. That seems a little mad, but the computer's a great tool. I believe it is. We're able to draw and come up with very quick changes to things versus what we would have seen early 2000s. So in that respect, I think you can actually draw now in Revit, AutoCAD systems where you're drawing the three-dimensional model in real time, and you can actually take a cut through it any direction you want, and it'll throw it to a drawing. The old way is rendering and cutting the building up in parts and drawing it two-dimensionally. So things have improved. I guess it really boils down to the operator of the Revit AutoCAD equipment, though, so, and that program. Okay, are we at a complete? Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I get mic'd up again here. David, that was tremendous, and thank you. You know, there was some very interesting stories, some good messaging in there, and I'll sort of work backwards. I think, you know, as people who live in this city, you look around town and you think about the buildings that you like. You know, there's no stat that I could come up with, but probably 80% of them come up with a stat.
It's a good stat.
We're done by local architects, and that doesn't happen by accident. It's because they know their community, and they know the people they're working with, and they know if they screw up, they'll never get hired again, so they really do try harder. And so for that message that you were sending about, you know, the local architects and what they can do for our community, it's an important message for us. You know, I think just going back to the beginning of your talk, just the amount of artwork that you've been doing and producing, I'm not sure when you found time to actually do architecture. When I was painting back then, and David doesn't know this story, I actually painted his dad's house. It was a summer job, working for College Pro Painters.
Excellent.
I wasn't down the Bahamas painting. I was on the roof on Louise Street.
Very good. I didn't know that.
Painting your bedroom window.
Giddy up.
But at any rate, it's been really interesting and wonderful for us to hear the talk tonight. We've got another in the series of the lecture series, April 20th, I believe. I think I've got that date right. We've got Christopher Palmer, you know, a rotten Toronto architect coming.
Yeah, that's right.
But also a wonderful guy. It's a firm that they have truly meshed their urban design and landscape architecture and architecture together. And it's a smaller firm that should be quite interesting to hear what they have to say. But I think we owe David another round of applause for a great talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Pleasure.
Thank you for coming out.